Oh, there we go. I'll start again. Welcome everybody to Refresh Teaching. Normally I'm just somebody hiding behind a name or whatever with the mute on, but I stimulated this particular event today because I'm a real fan of oral exams. I started doing oral exams when I came to ETH 24 years ago, and learned for some Meisters. I've done most of my oral exams in German, so that's always been a little bit of a challenge. And what I've seen as rector is that as the student numbers have increased, and as we've also been able to carry out online computer-based examinations, and also as the background of our professors at ETH has changed from being mainly Swiss when I first came here, with the foreigners mainly being from Germany. Now we've become much more international. And I thought it would be really interesting to share some of the thoughts about oral examinations. And so Let very kindly found three speakers, and they kindly asked me to share my thoughts. And I noticed with interest that they're either very close to retirement, or both my colleagues are just retired, literally. And so I am concerned a little bit that this might have been perhaps a skill that might be disappearing at ETH. So I thought, well, let's talk about it, because it's one of those things that's much harder to write down and say this is actually how you should do it. So I'm going to share a little bit from my perspective to start off with, what I've done and how I've done it, and I'm sure we will all come together in a very nice way and be able to share with each other. Now I have to just set this up. Give me a moment while I just do that, make sure I've got the right one in the right screen, and I have the subtitles off. Okay, there we go. That looks good. Right, there we go. So yes, so the title was designed by
Sarah, it's still presenters view. We still see what you have on the right as your next slide.
Okay, thank you very much. Going to that one. How's that? Is that better?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Marvelous. So wonderful. So Let decided on the title Definitely Worth It, and I absolutely support that. So my hope is that this will stimulate a little bit of a discussion. And I sort of dug around into the internet and found a few pictures, because of course right from the very beginning people had been examining, doing critical thinking, arguing about what should be the right answer to various problems. And that was, I think, the original approach, perhaps up to medieval times. And then I was fascinated to find actually that Imperial China started doing written exams quite a long time ago as well. And you see a picture that I borrowed from the Beijing Palace Museum. And this was really because of the scale and because of the fairness, and because people had been preferring their own family, people coming from their town and whatever. So Imperial China was really a great leader in the beginning of the written exams. And of course, more recently, we've engaged in a large increase in the number of computer-based online exams to try and be authentic. And I thought it might be quite interesting to have a look at the taxonomy of educational objectives. This is, I think, the next generation of what I knew as Bloom's. And what one starts off at the very lowest level here of remembering, which you can deal with a bit with multiple choice or effectively parrot learning, which is really not what we want to do, to really confirming understanding, being able to apply it, and then going on to the much higher level of analyzing, evaluating, and creating, that we tend to sort of get at a little bit by our projects and our thesis. And I think when you see where oral exams could be placed alongside the written exams and the online computer-based exams, again, this is a rough allocation, you can see why we shouldn't lose the skills to offer oral examinations. And there's really a very good niche for oral examinations to fill in judging learning. And I'm going to, just from my own experience, a little bit share how we could conduct oral examinations, where they might fit into the portfolio, and when we should use this approach. And these are just some of my written printed teaching resources from my time as a professor on top of our blended learning platforms, Caliche initially, and then GeoTip afterwards. And starting sort of in the middle, when we were in the 4 diplôme, we had the first 4 diplôme, we did written examinations, and then in the second 4 diplôme, we were already doing oral exams. It's really quite interesting. We put three classes together, and the students would be examined by 2 of the professors. And it was very early on, when my German was not good when I first came. I really was very, very poor. So I had to do a lot of preparation, a lot of work, and much different from examinations later on. But even so, in civil engineering, both the course here on the left and on the right, these were still taught in German, because civil engineering masters was taught in German up until the time I left to become rector. So you can see there was quite a lot of time, 2 different ways of doing it. The co-examiner here, Rudi Röger, with 3 per hour, and then latterly I examined also with Ralph Herzog, and we had 1 per hour, and I probably did 2/3 of them, and here we often split 1 for 1. So that was a little bit the background. And I think the roles of the professors and the assistants in preparing for the exams and during the exams is worth thinking about. Are they, in terms of these 4 different things, teacher, examiner, authority, and coach? And I sort of see the assistants a little bit more in the coaching role, although as professor, I know I flipped across into coaching a little bit as well. And one in the examination, it's very interesting when you have 2 people in there. How do you share the load, and what role do both of the people play in that? And it's not like the detective story, good cop, bad cop, but a little bit that you can get more out of the students sometimes when one person is in the lead, is the main examiner, and the other person is allowed at the end to ask a supplementary question to help the students show their learning, and also to provide a little bit of quality control. So in advance, in the very old days, I used to write everything out in German, and latterly I'll show you what I did. The assistants were extremely helpful. You can see from the timings there, we had 2-hour slots and lots of coffee to keep us going. And they focused very hard in that 2 hours. They had to write a lot, they had to concentrate, and they also gave a lot of feedback at the end in terms of the marking. And because of this, it was usually about 2 weeks needed. So it was quite a lot of effort. But actually, I really, really enjoyed my oral examinations. I really enjoyed the fencing with the students, and especially the very, very good students. So I used to start, we had all of these sheets. You can see there are 92 sheets there for all of the students, and implying that probably there were 46 students in this row of exams. And I would write down prepare my sketch, so I knew exactly which student was getting which problem. You can see a bridge abutment here that had to be constructed on soft clay, etc., with piles and abutment and whatever. And I would put the sketch on the whiteboard. I would draw it myself. Sometimes I would put up a drawing, but that would have been a bit better than this little sketch here, or a photograph. And one would start off with an opening gambit to try and ease the nerves of the students and help them to get started. And then the assistant would be working hard in writing down my questions, what the examinee would answer, and then making their initial comment on what they thought, whether they thought the answer was right. I thought that was really interesting. Actually, that was an innovation that they decided on themselves. And you can see Rudi Reger is there as the quality control at the end. And this is an example from another student where you can see again quite an extensive record of what questions I had asked, the answers, the questions, and again, the red one, the red square shows where the assistant had written in red where something was missing, where I had to add something in because they hadn't perhaps done something right. This was to do with piled foundations. And again, comments, a tick would be a very good answer or an absolutely appropriate answer. the okay was a bit yes, yes, a little bit so, and the wavy lines meant that I had to go and dig quite a lot, and I had to come back and answer. That meant probably 4 different questions in order to get an answer. And I've written down there here a bit backward, but in the end it was quite a good answer for this student. So trying to understand a little bit how we give the marks in terms of achieving quality, how we judge the performance of the student. And you saw 20 minutes per student when you need probably at the end 2 minutes to really review. You don't have very much time. So you make your opening gambit, they give you an answer. Is it sort of satisfactory? Do you need a supplementary question? Is it unsatisfactory? How do you go again? And there were some cases where I would ask questions and the answers got worse and worse. And you're thinking, oh dear, this is really quite difficult to find what the student knows. So in a sense, I then quite often go from a completely different approach, and then I would use what you can see here with this nice picture of the doggy waiting, and then I would come back towards the end of the examination and try and see if I could dig out really the answer to that question that I was seeking at the very beginning. The book by Malcolm Gladwell is really interesting. It's called About Thin Slicing. It's about how people make decisions extremely quickly. And he gives wonderful examples. I do recommend the book. One of them is of a coach who could look at somebody making a second serve in tennis. And from the moment that the person had hit the ball, they could get over 95% right as to whether the ball would go into the court. And that is the process of expertise, deliberate practice, and really understanding the subject and being able to judge whether something is right or not. And when I read the book, that's exactly what I do in my oral examinations. And you could argue, if you went back if you're a fan of Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, that actually you don't need to mark anything because everybody should instantly know what quality is. But of course, at the end of the day, we're a university, we have to give our students marks. They need it. That's part of the general understanding of what you do when you come to university. You learn, you develop, and part of the culture is that we give them a mark. We at ETH don't have a rank list at the end, but even so, that's an important part of it. So there's 3 books that are quite interesting for future learning, and it's quite difficult to really work out what's going on and put it in a quantity. You can see on the left-hand side, I've put some marks. I've put in the opening gambit. I put in the sort of students that have got a good to very good first response in the green, sort of a bit in the middle, solid, and then down at the bottom, marginal to a little bit in danger. So you could have your sort of middle student and you keep asking questions and they go up and they go down and they sort of end up in the middle. You could have somebody who's doing really pretty well, has been strong all the way through. And I was always a bit tough on giving 6s. And I would only give a 6 at the end if I really felt that the student had been able to show me that they had not only amazing conceptual understanding, but they were also able to think beyond some of the things that I had taught them. So I'd ask them a slightly tough question to see if they could think around it and come up with the answer. And then we had some who started very well and decayed a little bit. And then you would have some who were a bit on the line. And one for me was, what do you do? When do you fail a student? And I had a very, very clear, I would give them lots of different chances with all of the questions, and probably you would have to ask more questions because less came back to you. And at the end of the day, my judgment, especially in design and construction and civil engineering, was, would I drive over the bridge, the bridge that this student had designed the foundations for? And if not, I'm very sorry, they have to learn and come back again. It's not so easy to do it in all subjects. And I did have one very interesting case where a student fainted on me. She hadn't had any breakfast, and fortunately we had water in the room, and we had some food, and we sat her down, and we were able to extend into one of the breaks to be able to give her the chance to do the examination. She wanted to carry on. And she did, and she passed it. She passed it quite well. And in fact, later came back to me for her master's project and went off to Stanford to do it, and did very well there. So there are some kind of interesting things that sometimes happen. So anyway, just here is that example of the 3 sheets I showed you before. The mark that the student was awarded in the end. How did we do that? At the end of the exam, the lead examiner would ask the others what mark they had in their mind. And the assessments were always very interesting as well. And usually the 3 of us would all be within 0.25 of a mark. And if we were not sure, we would go back and we would look at those 3 pages. We would look very quickly at where the student had not been able to answer something. And at the end, we would make the award. And then at the end of the day, we would cross-check examples in the higher level, 5.5 to 6, 4.75 to 5.25, and around about 4 for comparability. And then again, at the end of the exam period, we would do that. We would do that again. So that, in a nutshell, is a little bit of a story about how I've engaged in oral exams, what I've learned from it, and what I've been thinking about as I've been trying to do them. And I think quality is really important. I absolutely love the opportunity to probe and to find out about the student learning. That also fed back to me as a lecturer myself to improve my teaching. And I'm absolutely convinced that there is value in oral examinations, but of course that's up to you to decide. Thank you very much, everybody, and I will now hand over back to Refresh Teaching. And I kept to time too, didn't I? That was amazing.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for this insight to your experiences. We will probably come back to you with some questions later. Unless there are immediate questions just about the content, then please speak up now.
Oh, yes, I have, if I can. The question I have, I would love to have done it like you, Sarah, with having had a break, a morning coffee break. But if you do it in the exam period, you cannot schedule it. So in your role as your rector, I would like to ask you to, if you schedule oral exams, that we could actually have times for breaks in there. At the moment, the system is not foreseeing it.
My God, it must have got worse in my time. That's terrible. I didn't know that. Is that really true?
Yes, it's really true. You can only specify your lunch break, but if you say you're doing it, say from 9 to 12 or so, there's definitely no way to put a break in.
Huh. I always put in a break at 10.
How do you do that?
Maybe when you register.
In the Prüfungsplan.
Yeah, when you register, Uli. When you register.
Okay, I'm too stupid to do that. I'll find it out next time. Thanks.
We will make sure that let hold your hand, Uli, to make sure you find out how to do it. But this was life-saving, and I certainly don't drink as much coffee as I did then. But it's really, really important for this quality of the first, and that's also why I understand many people can't flip. But for me, Rudi Rueger was a colleague from industry who brought in this industry perspective, and he was an ETH graduate, absolutely loved doing the exams, and together we really turned into quite a great team. And there was no difference between the marks. Okay, his experience, he would ask slightly different questions to me, of course, but I think that's, I'm afraid, part of the luck of the draw. Which question do you get? Which examiner did you get? But I'm absolutely convinced at the end of the day that the marks were awarded pretty fairly.
Thank you. So then we could already clarify a very important question. Thank you, Ulrike, for this. And for the sake of time, I suggest that I hand over to our next speaker, which, following the written program, would be Professor Markus Ebbi. I leave the stage for you, Markus.
Okay, thank you very much. I think it's hard to follow Sarah on such a highly prepared and outstanding presentation on oral exams. I have prepared some slides, but I think I can make without. And I just can give you my experience over the past 26 years or so on examinations on different topics. As I have written in my outline, you might have read it, I consider oral examinations as an essential part in the academic education system. And I view it as a an essential step towards an academic discussion that scientists are often engaged in. And this one task and one goal of this scientific education to bring the students at that stage. And the oral exams are just a test or provide an opportunity to try it out, this discussion. I have done oral exams in different topics, but according also to this scheme, these oral exams tend to be more frequent towards the end of the academic education. In biology, for example, we have an end exam that is the final point of the master degree, and that is an oral examination. And it represents so the final point in this education system. And the same is true for a PhD exam, where we also have an oral examination that is the end point of this part in this educational process. So I think we have to, this role is very important, and it is not so much the mark that is then applied or given to the student, but rather the process itself of the oral examination that makes the important point. So in that context, I noticed over my now more than 20 years of experience that it was hard to fail an oral examination for the student. There's some cases for sure, but it was difficult not to pass. The students could get not optimal marks, but failing was rare. And this is probably also due to the style. I was examining orally together with my colleagues. We were always two in the room and examining and evaluating the students. So what are the tools in oral examination? First, I consider it as important to have a discussion. That is the main point, oral. And you have drawings and blackboards. These are the tools, and there is not much more than that. We cannot expect high-level drawings in such a stressful situation for the student. One tool I always used was to let the student choose the entry point of the exam and start from there. Because this generates, from my perspective, a system of trust that you give the student the freedom, where would you like to start? Of course, they think then they will start at the area they know the best. But from there, you can then try to expand and try to find how they can connect to other topics in that field you are examining. That was, from my perspective, always very helpful. I also noticed that it is also a cultural thing how students react to these oral examinations. In some cultures, they could hardly, they were not aware of that system. And others, for them, it was easy to use it. The final tool I would like to mention is give immediate feedback at the end of the exam. I think it is very important that we have to tell the student immediately after the exam how he or she performed. Because this is then still fresh and it will not change. This is, I view it differently from Sarah. When you look at your notes, yes, you might change a little bit, but the overall evaluation will be the same because you still have it fresh in your memory. And therefore, I think, I know it's against the rules that you give immediately a mark, you tell them the mark, but I think it is important in creating a trustful environment also by telling them at the end how their performance was. Then at the finally, what are then the goals of such oral examinations? I think we have to evaluate conceptual and academic thinking. I do not want to evaluate in an oral exam what the student knows, but how deep the knowledge goes. How can they connect the different things? The pros and the cons of the oral exams, I think they require trust, that the students have to trust the examiner, that they evaluate them correctly. It is extremely difficult to have an exact marking because we have moving goals, so to speak. As an examiner, I can try to find the strong points of the students. And at the same time, I can also try to find the weak points of the students. So I can choose the direction. This is difficult to handle. And I always try to find the strong points of the students and not the weak points. Try to find what they know and not to find out what they don't know. So these are the pros and the cons. And in discussions I had with the students, talking about sense or nonsense of oral exams, I often told them that when they apply for a job, they go for job interviews. And this is the very same situation as in an oral exam. They will be examined by their future boss, how they perform under stress, how much they know, how they can present themselves. So oral exams are not only important in these academic settings from my point of view, they also prepare the students of a situation like job interviews where they're also examined. And when I told this to the students, they start to think about this, and many of them changed their view about oral exams. So that was my point.
Thank you so much. Are there any immediate questions for Professor Abbey?
Yes, I have one.
Go ahead.
Marcus, how did you deal with people who were like around the 4?
Well, I'm probably not a very stringent examiner. If they are around the 4, I give them not a 4, but a 4.25.
Okay. Because I have a lot of experience with Matura-Prüfungen, and there's sometimes, you know, there's a lot of discussions about the ones who fail or not, and sometimes there you really have to discuss before you tell them. But maybe that's different in final exams.
Yes, here it is different. I know we should not tell them the mark immediately after the exam, but I nevertheless did it. I'm retired, so nobody can.
I'm not commenting
for that anymore.
I would disagree actually, Marcus, because I have found it very useful to afterwards get also the feedback from the co-examiner. And we kind of sometimes really had, especially if maybe you are biased, and I think you are biased to different degrees, sometimes positively, sometimes negatively. And so I'm so glad that I don't have to tell them the marks right away.
Ulrike, there were always 2 of us in the exam. And after the student left, we discuss always the mark between the 2 of us. And then we call the student back in, discuss how he or she performed, and give it the mark.
Okay, that's at least a little better. But nevertheless, I kind of like that. I do it the same way Sarah does, that I need the end of the day or after each period, say at lunch break and at the end of the day, to recalibrate. And so to me, I think it's very dangerous to tell a mark right away.
Thank you for this already start of discussion. I think that's an important question to see how well do I feel with how I'm handling. Thanks for the precising point, Professor Abby. And again, now I hand over to our third speaker, and this is Professor Antonio Toni.
Yeah, thank you, Nora. Well, most of what has been said so far, I share it. Yeah, so I have not much to add actually, but I would like to show you one specific example. If I can share the screen, just one slide, okay? So you see a rather complex chemical reaction with a lot of information also above the arrow. And these are additives that one adds to this system. And you see the date of this work, 2020, Journal of American Chemical Society, page 14,000. So that means this work appeared during the time I was teaching the course. However, I was not aware of that work in the literature during the semester. I was aware maybe, well, I noticed it in the literature in January or so, and then I said, oh, that's a nice question for the oral exam, or a starting point for an oral exam. And that is actually inspired by a very, maybe even simplistic, simple and simplistic way of thinking about what is the purpose of a bachelor and master study, if not the ability of understanding the literature, the current literature. And so this is an example of the current literature. And then there are these 3 points: discuss formation of alkyl and aryl complexes. This goes back to topics that have been treated explicitly during the course. So that is I would say that is, knowing that is the threshold for reaching 4. The grade 4, and discuss formation of the catalyst. So out of this, there will be a catalyst forming, and then that performs then this reaction. That is also in part topics that have been discussed during the course. Discuss a possible reaction mechanism. So it addresses the question of molecular understanding of a specific reaction that is new for the students and new for the examiner in a way, yeah. And even the specific paper in the literature will not necessarily provide a precise answer, and that's why I'm really stressing this point that I also outlined in my summary. How much of the way of thinking of the topic, of the discipline, has been internalized by the students. So, and the ability to put puzzle parts together and extending that thinking towards elaborating on a rather complex reaction for that, at the bachelor level, I would say in this case. Now there is the point of being able to compare. This has been already raised by Uli before and by Sarah. So that means calibrating is very important. And so if one student fails on this question, I don't know yet if the question is too difficult or goes beyond that internalized way of thinking that the student had the chance to have during the course. So I asked the next student exactly the same question. And that's a way I use this specific question now in 2 weeks ago for 3 different students. And that is also an internal calibration, okay? Grading and marking, I would say it's done relatively quickly with the co-examiner, and will reach in a matter of 2 or 3 minutes agreement. So the differences do not go beyond a quarter of a point, maybe half a point at maximum. And then we have to discuss and recalibrate a little bit internally. But that works surprisingly fast, I would say. And this agreement is there very, very, very quickly, and it's consistent, at least in my experience. And that's why I would say, without theorizing too much, I've never theorized about oral exams. I just did them, yeah, in this way. And obviously, the students need to be informed how this works. And so that means this question, for instance, might be taken over and discussed during the course in the future, as an example. Okay, so the students are well informed about the procedure. They will know that they will get this sheet of paper, or now online, of course, they see it on the screen. And I ask them, write down the reaction on a piece of paper for you, and then you will be able also to add notes, to put down drawings and so on. That is part then of the protocol, yeah, of the exam, and the co-examiner will also write down notes. And then using what the students has said and written, and what we have noted, that is the material that we use for marking. And by the way, in Day Cup, this is, I would say, well, at bachelor level, that means after the 3rd year, all students will have to pass oral exams in all 3 core subjects, that is inorganic, organic, and physical chemistry. And in inorganic chemistry, for instance, we do only oral exams at bachelor, and physical chemistry as well. And so, I mean, the discussion of that question that I've shown as an example is either half an hour when this course is examined as a semester course, or is roughly half of a 45 minutes period when it's examined as a Jahreskurs. So there is enough time really to find out how much the students knows and is able to do with that, with the kind of discussion, I would say. And I also declare it also always during the course that the aim of this oral exam is really to engage the students in a discussion, and that they must be aware of the fact that in many cases, precise answers do not exist. Okay? And it's not very often a matter of yes or no. It's a matter of discussing, of putting forward arguments in favor of one hypothesis or the other. So that's roughly what I wanted to add to the previous speakers.
Thank you very much. Are there immediate questions to Professor Tournier regarding his input? Then I would allow myself a question, because I'm curious. We had this nice comparable view a bit. Already Sarah said what would be for her the point where she would say, okay, no, I would not go over the bridge. Then also Professor Abby was asked the question, failing or not. So how did you decide this? Is it a student that I have to let fail or not?
You're asking me?
I was asking, you explained it a bit when you answered to Urs, and now I would like to know from Professor Tony how he did that, because then we have an answer from all of you regarding the same point of, how do I decide if I let someone fail? You said that failing was rare, so I think that already also put somehow students at ease. And for Professor Tony, he did not mention this point. That's why I'm asking
Oh,
this.
okay, I can add that. Just in the last 2 weeks ago, we even gave it 2. So it's not difficult to fail. And it's not difficult to recognize when it's necessary to fail.
I'll give you one, Nora. I remember way back in the early days with this Geotechnic 3, where this was the second 4 diplôme, and a woman came into the exam, and she clearly hadn't learned anything. So I started off on a normal question, and I would go down and down and down and down and down. And the most simple rule of soil mechanics is the law of effective stress, that the total load on the soil is carried by the effective stress between the particles and the pore pressure in the water. She couldn't even tell me that. So in the end, I'm afraid she got a 1, or maybe I gave her a 1.5. I can't. That was the most disappointing experience I have ever had in my examination. She clearly hadn't prepared at all, and she turned up, but that was it. So there have been, I've given a few marks in the 2s when it's been really very, very challenging, and I always try to be extremely calm. And you all know I'm quite an excitable person generally, and I get very dynamic, or I can be, but I try to be really focused, really calm, really and not to show what I'm thinking, so that if a student is really struggling, they're not looking in my face and saying, I'm making a complete mess of it here. So just to be helpful and supportive, but sort of towards the end, after 30 minutes of doing something like that, and it's a bit more difficult. But really, I think that is important in trying to help them find their way out. And some of them dig a deep hole, and you almost have to say, right, we're going to take a cut. Sometimes I've even changed direction with a question just to give them a second chance when I can see I've clearly chosen the wrong question. So I'm not as nice as Marcus in letting them choose the start. But sometimes I used to have 6 chapters, 1 introductory chapter and 6 chapters in theoretical soil mechanics. And I would usually examine more or less in one chapter. But again, if there were people who were doing very well, I'd spring across to another one. If they were struggling, I would also perhaps go and take a new chapter and see if I might have a better chance of getting something out of them. But you need a longer exam to do that, really. I had 30 minutes for that one. In a 20-minute exam minus 2 minutes for the marking, it's a bit difficult.
And what I do also, maybe also in addition to this, is that I tend to press the students sometimes by just putting in little questions or remarks like, how do you know, why is that typical, and so on. Yeah, so also to lead that discussion by the students. They feel under pressure, yes, by that.
Thank you very much. And I think you also pressed an important point. It helps a lot if in advance students are informed as much as possible on how you will do this oral exam, because as we've seen, there are differences in entering and how you proceed. And I think that's a very important point. I'm grateful you stressed this, giving a look forward to the students. This will be like that helps a lot to put them at ease as much as possible. So also thank you for this remark. I would like to open the discussion to everyone. Also, your own experiences, questions have now the time to be discussed in the last 15 minutes. We are quite good in time. I'm happy about that. You can also use the chat, of course, to write your questions if someone's already speaking and you nevertheless want your question to be seen and heard. So please go ahead.
Sarah raised her hand already.
Mm-hmm.
I have 2 points. One is about people who get very nervous and have blackouts and then who can't remember the most simple things. I'm just thinking that in a written exam where you have more time, I'm wondering if there's a difference in performance for people who have 20 minutes versus the 3 hours, say, of a written exam. That would be a first question I have. And the second point about people being under pressure, it strikes me that if there is a culture of discussing exactly in this same way throughout the semester, then perhaps the pressure will be less. That if students are accustomed to, I see Antonio Tony already nodding, that if this is just what we do, we have discussions all the way through the semester, and then at the end, there'll be one more just between you and the professor, rather than with the whole class, as a way of reducing that catastrophic moment. I have 20 minutes to prove myself or fail miserably and go down in flames. Yeah. I wonder, yeah, so I really liked the oral exams when I finally came to ETH and had a chance to do them. I thought they were great. This discussion, I really loved it. But I'm wondering for people who are nervous and have blackout problems, whether this is a disadvantage for them. Yeah, I would be asking Sarah in particular because
Okay.
woman who
Well, I had that one case of the poor student passing out, which was a bit of a shock, but we managed to get her back on course, and she finished. But she's the only one who I've really observed. Some people struggle, and that's why when you come at it from a slightly different direction to try and help them get started, and then sometimes you find once they're up and running, they're absolutely fine. So, but I haven't experienced that. I haven't really experienced that quite as much as you imply. Maybe my colleagues have, and it's difficult for me to argue between the 20 minutes and the 3 hours because you're examining quite different things really. And I think using the 3 hours exams or the 2.5 hours or whatever early on is acceptable. And I think just probing on the knowledge is better later on. So what was your second question was again?
No, it was just a comment that if this kind of discussion happens constantly
yeah, okay.
the semester, then we're doing aligned, we're aligning our teaching and the actions have to do with what's expected of them and how they're assessed at the end. And
let Antonio or Marcus answer that one.
Yeah, well, it's not, it was more of a comment from my side as a that if we do that, I think that takes away the pressure.
Oh, I mentioned that, you know, I saw it as my task of an examiner to prevent these difficult situations. That is the major task. That you always have to be aware of that, because if something like that happens, you cannot evaluate the potential of the candidate. And so I tried early on to prevent this, and most of the times it worked. There were some cases, and then I said, no, I was unable to evaluate your performance. Come back next year.
Well, I had a case recently of a young female students coming in, sitting down and start crying. And then you have to be able to cope with such a situation, and that's really the problem of this awareness of how the interaction with this person is working. That makes it tiring, by the way, because you have to stretch all your antennas out, and really try to understand the person, and also to try to understand in what kind of mental state the person is. And so with the crying lady, well, we said I tried to calm her down and give her something to drink, a glass of water and so on. We had tissues on the table, and then I said, well, do you want to come back this afternoon? And it was much better.
Okay.
So this alertness and preparedness to improvise in the end,
I used to, in the very first lecture, I would show everybody the distribution of the marks from the last oral examinations, and I remember my averages were around 5.2 to 5.3, and the students were absolutely stunned. They thought, bloody hell, this is good news. And they also used to speak to the previous generations who would say, look, she's like a big mummy or something like that. I don't know. I mean, this is what I heard round the back. And so I think that's an important understanding, that students see there is a really great opportunity to get a decent mark. And we were always completely overbooked. We increased the number of slots from 30 to 40 to 60, and we still had waiting. So I think that also meant that they also felt that they could get good marks, they could learn well, and all the rest of it. So I'm sure that's part and parcel of the communication around it, and being very clear what you will do in the examination.
Thank you so much for the very comprehensive answers. And also what Marcos Abi, what you were saying about starting with asking the students, where would you like to start, so that they can choose and have some more control. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah, for your question. I noticed earlier Philip Biri raised also his hand. Is the question still not answered, Philip?
It's somehow answered. I think the difference between a written exam is that the student has in a written exam, the student has the chance to choose a bit with which questions the student would like to start. And maybe due to the well-chosen question, the student gets into a flow. And I think this is something very important, and which I also would think it would be good that the students get the chance to get into a flow in an oral exam. And therefore, I think the idea of Marcos Abi to offer the student the entry point is a really good idea, because then you allow the student to get into a flow, which makes much more easier for the students to answer, and then may also get into questions which are more difficult, which are on a higher level. And I think this is a really good idea, which I really like a lot. Because the worst for the student is that he, from the beginning, he feels bad, and I don't know the answer, and then it goes down, and he get a blackout. And I think to offer the students the chance to have a flow throughout the examination, which is not on a high level, and he gets the 4 anyway, it's still better than to have a bad feeling and cannot answer a question from the beginning.
Thank you, Philip.
We had 2 questions also in the chat. One from Dorothee, or a comment more about the validity and students complaining and having, or that you should be able to also justify your marks in case of a complaint, which is more of a problem these days, it sounds like. And there's also a question from Urs, explicitly to you, Nora. Did you read it?
Yes, I read it.
And then afterwards, Ulrike also has a question, so maybe we can do it in that order.
Yeah. Regarding Urs' question, which concerns the personal bias danger in oral exams, he kindly referred to me. I would say that we still have a second event regarding refresh teaching. We had also one already in 2018, and Guillaume kindly put the link, because there we also mentioned this part of how examiners can assure that there's at least as less as a personal bias than possible. Sarah mentioned that she pays a lot of attention on her facial expression, which is of course one of the somehow for students sometimes advantages or disadvantages when they can read your immediate feedback, which is not possible in written exams. So yes, of course, there's a lot of literature, and yes, of course, some people are afraid of doing oral exams because of this danger of bias. And I think that was at the heart of you, Sarah, when you said you want to do a refresh teaching in order to somehow motivate lecturers by saying, well, it's worth it and it's possible to do it. So I think you all 3 have the impression that the personal bias is not such a huge problem that it would hinder us doing good oral exams, as I understand from you. But I would not like to answer it as a psychologist. I think I really would give this question to you, because you have been confronted with those thoughts. Am I fair? Is my judgment reliable? So that's why I would give the question to the examiners, and then I ask Ulrike when we have the input. That's fine.
Well, I think this is intrinsic to oral exams. There is a bias, and you can reduce the bias by having 2 or more examiners in the room. And this helps. So this reduces the danger of bias. And the other thing is, as I mentioned, I see this is also as an educational process. Later on, you're constantly in this situation where we have examinations not marked, but these are examinations, and there the personality and this bias is a constant factor. You cannot deny it. And so it might become relevant, much more relevant later on. We can try to minimize it, but we cannot eliminate it.
But that's exactly what I was aiming at. You know, what are we actually examining? Are we examining the personal ability of someone of selling what they know? And maybe the scientific depth is not so deep. But in the end, they get the grade for being good in chemistry and not for being good in selling things.
I completely disagree with you. I completely disagree with you. I think you can really drill down, and I absolutely love this fencing with absolutely the best students, but I'm also very happy with the not so good students as well. And it's really exciting when you lead somebody through and they're jumping ahead of you as well a little bit. They're really good students. And that is, but that's again, bias. If somebody answers the questions efficiently, quickly, and well, then of course you're going to give them a good mark. And if they show that they've demonstrated the basic conceptual understanding and they can jump off beyond that, then of course you're going to mark that, I think, quite highly. But I try really hard not to have exhibit bias in any way at all. And I think I'm absolutely convinced having the second person and the assistant in the room as well is very, very helpful to kick you if you think you might. And mostly, again, I don't know the students well enough. I know them a bit if they've come into the labs and I've exchanged, but I don't know them well enough to have formed a very clear bias in any particular way. So I think my personal view is that it's all manageable, and I have had no complaints whatsoever in 18 years of doing oral examinations, not one. And I don't think anybody's even asked to come back and see the notes, which they do all the time with the written exams. So I think that's an interesting reflection, actually. Maybe the students are more competitive these days and they do that.
Mm-hmm.
If I can add something on this point and this personal bias, of course, there are personal biases in terms of, well, I know that student's better than the other, for instance, because this specific student during the course was very active in discussing and asking questions and so on. I know the person by name, which does not happen too often, for instance. I'm talking about the course with 50 to 60 people, roughly, in the 5th semester. And so that allows, of course, a lot of interactions, actually, but there is always a group of 5 to 10 people who do better in terms of interactions with me during the semester. And so they are planted in my mind. And so there is this bias. However, I don't try to incite the student to sell what they know, but just what I tell them is, during the oral exam, by definition, you have to talk. And it doesn't matter if you ask me to rephrase a question, or if you tell me, well, I don't remember exactly that, just tell me something. Don't wait until I rephrase the question. That is also part of the information that is given to the students before the exams, of course, at the end of the course.
Yes, I think again that's an important point to let them prepare. So if you want my impression, Urs, I would never say that you should not do oral exams. I'm so much convinced, and I've spoken to a lot of lecturers also preparing the event in 2018, and I heard from all of them, when I do an oral exam, I'm much more sure about the grade I give. I'm much more sure if this student has to pass or not, much more than when I do a written exam. So that would be my answer to this. And I just would like to give Ulrike the opportunity to ask her question because we are short of time.
I was going to answer what Sarah was saying with students blacking out. And I have since a few times changed to telling exactly what Marcus did, telling the students that they can start with the topic of their choice up to 5 minutes. And now with online also having cheat sheets. And then blacking out has never happened again. So I think by easing them in, I could see it to what I did before when I didn't do it. It really helps. And also with the confidence, especially now online, with the confidence of that I don't know, I don't want to know what they have left and right. They have that confidence. But nevertheless, some try to get by without learning. And I'm sometimes, maybe I'm not as nice as you are, Antonio, but when I had the case that it was also a woman who cried, I thought that was a sign of trying to not make me fail her. And that didn't go over well with me. So I wasn't as nice as you were.
Well, that can well be. I guess the question is whether or not you recognize all at once if the student is playing or not. In my case, the example I've given you, I was pretty sure from the very beginning, this is real. Okay.
Okay. In my case, I wasn't. So that's why I was like hard and say, no, 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 this doesn't work.
Yeah. Well, after all, I guess many students, or a majority of students in the cup see in me a nice guy. Yes.
It's not the worst role to play, I think. Thank you so much. I think we reached the time to finish. I hope that we can still gather something online. The event has been recorded, so of course you will probably see that. Julia can inform you about. I just want to hint to this second part of this Refresh Teaching event about oral exams, which then it will take place during this semester, and it will be a bit more focused also on the legal viewpoints. It will also focus on biases because we will look a bit more into psychology of assessment. So maybe Urs' question can be answered more thoroughly also there. So please join in when we continue to talk about oral exams, all again with somehow the idea to motivate and to help lecturers that are confronted with the idea of, oh, okay, oral exam, don't feel so well with that. So thank you to the 3 great experiences we heard from you, Rector Springman, Marcus Abbey, and Antonio Toni. I think that was very insightful for all of us. So I wish you, Julia, maybe you want to say something?
Yeah, just also thank you from my side, and have a look at the Refresh Teaching website. I will put slides of the recording there, and in 1 week's time you'll find like the new topics, the upcoming topics on the website too, and we will inform the community via email. When you want to get on the news letter list, send me an email, send an email to Refresh Teaching, and we put you on the list and you get information about upcoming events. So yeah, also from my side, thank you very much, and see you soon back here in this Zoom room.
Yeah, and there